There is an island you can see across the water, close enough to make out people moving on the far shore. And it's already tomorrow over there. Not a different time zone, a different day. While you're finishing breakfast on this side, the people barely 2.5 miles away have already lived through most of a day you haven't even started yet. These are the Diomede Islands, two specks of rock in the middle of the Bering Strait, sitting almost close enough to shout across, and yet separated by a border, a sealed frontier, and a line on the map that splits time itself. One island is nicknamed Tomorrow, the other Yesterday. And how two neighbors ended up almost a full day apart is one of the strangest stories on the whole map. About halfway between Alaska and Siberia, in the narrow gap of ocean called the Bering Strait, there are two small islands. The bigger one is called Big Diomede. The smaller one, naturally, is Little Diomede. They look like twins, both steep, windswept, treeless slabs of rock rising out of a frigid sea. But they belong to two different worlds. Big Diomede is Russian territory. On Russian maps, it's called Ratmanov Island. Little Diomede, just over 2 miles away, is part of the United States. It's in Alaska. At their closest points, the two islands are only about 3.8 kilometers apart, around 2.5 miles. On a clear day, from one island, you can plainly see the other. You could paddle the distance in well under an hour. They even got their European name as a pair. In 1728, the explorer Vitus Bering, sailing for the Russian crown, spotted the islands on the 8th of August, the feast day of a saint named Diomedes. So he named them for the day he saw them. But the people who already lived there had their own names long before Bering arrived, and to them the two islands were simply part of one home. And running invisibly through the water between them is one of the most consequential lines humans have ever drawn. A line that decides not just which country you're in, but what day it is. The international date line runs right between the two Diomedes. That line is where each calendar day on Earth officially begins and ends. Cross it going west and you jump forward, you lose a day. Cross it going east and you fall back, you gain one. And it happens to thread directly through this tiny gap of water. So here's the remarkable result. Because of the date line, and because each island keeps its own country's local time, Big Diomede sits about 21 hours ahead of Little Diomede. Not 24. The local time zones don't line up perfectly with the date line, but close. Big Diomede has earned the nickname Tomorrow Island. Little Diomede is Yesterday Isle. Stand on the American island on a Monday afternoon, look across the water, and you are quite literally looking into Tuesday. The people over there have already lived the day you're still in the middle of. Two islands you could see with your bare eyes, almost a full day apart. It is the closest place on Earth where you can stand in one day and stare directly at another. But the gap between them isn't only about time. For most of the last century, it was something far harder to cross. For thousands of years, both islands were home to the same people, the Iñupiat, who lived across this strait long before any border existed. They hunted seal, walrus, and whale on the ice, and they paddled between the islands and the mainland as a single, connected community. To them, this wasn't a frontier between empires, it was home. Today, though, the two islands could not be more different. On Little Diomede, the American side, there's a village clinging to the steep western slope. It's called Diomede, or in the Iñupiat language, Inalik. It's home to a small Iñupiat community, somewhere around 80 to 100 people, depending on the year. They still hunt seal, walrus, and whale on the sea ice, much as their ancestors did. And it is staggeringly isolated. There are no roads on the island, and no real harbor. For decades, the only way in during winter was a runway plowed onto the frozen sea, an airstrip made of ice that shifted position every year. In recent years, the ice has too often been too thin to land a plane at all, so the village now relies on a helicopter that flies in from the Alaskan mainland. Even the mail comes by helicopter, one of the only places in the entire United States where that's true. When the sea ice melts, the only way to reach Little Diomede is by boat or by air. It is about as far from the rest of the world as an American town can get. But look across to Big Diomede, the Russian island, and you'll find no village at all, no families, no homes, just a Russian weather station and a border post. Because something happened here in the 20th century that emptied that island completely. When the Cold War set in, this little gap of water became one of the tensest borders on the planet. Because the line between Little Diomede and Big Diomede wasn't just a border between two islands. It was the border between the United States and the Soviet Union. The two superpowers stood quite literally 2.5 miles apart. The Soviets decided that was too close. In the late 1940s, they forcibly relocated the indigenous people living on Big Diomede to the Russian mainland, moving an entire community off their own island to stop any contact across the new frontier. From then on, the island held only soldiers and a weather post. The border was sealed shut. People started calling it the Ice Curtain, a frozen echo of the Iron Curtain dividing Europe. And the cruel twist was this: families who had relatives on the other island, cousins, in-laws, old friends, were suddenly forbidden to cross. In some winters, the sea ice freezes so solid that an ice bridge forms right across the strait, and you could, in theory, simply walk from one island to the other. But you couldn't. For decades, that short walk across the ice was one of the most forbidden journeys on Earth. The strait that had once united one people had become a wall. For decades, nobody crossed that line. And then, in 1987, one person did, on purpose and in the most extraordinary way. Her name was Lynne Cox, a long-distance swimmer from California. She had spent 11 years seeking permission to swim straight across the Bering Strait, from American Little Diomede to Soviet Big Diomede, as a gesture of peace between two enemy nations. Think about what that meant. The water in that strait sits at around 6 or 7 degrees Celsius, low 40s Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill in minutes. And she intended to swim it with no wetsuit. Permission from the Soviet side only came at the last moment, reportedly cleared by Mikhail Gorbachev himself. On the 7th of August, 1987, Lynne Cox slipped into that freezing water and swam, for just over 2 hours, from one country to the other, from today straight into tomorrow, where Soviet citizens were waiting on the far shore to greet her. It worked as more than a swim. Later that year, when Gorbachev and President Reagan signed a major arms treaty, the two leaders raised a toast to her, to the woman who had swum across the ice curtain and proved the gap could be crossed. One person, in freezing water, reminding two superpowers how close they really were. The Diomede Islands are a kind of perfect accident, two rocks that nature placed within sight of each other, and that history then pulled almost a full day and an entire empire apart. A date line that splits Tuesday from Wednesday, a border that turned neighbors into strangers, and underneath it all, a single people who once moved freely across the ice before the lines arrived. When you stand on Little Diomede and look at tomorrow across the water, you're really looking at something deeper than a time zone. You're looking at how much of our world is decided not by the land itself, but by the lines we draw across it. The water doesn't know what day it is. Only we do. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe, because next time on Margins of the Map, we sail to the loneliest dot on the whole map, Tristan da Cunha, the most remote inhabited place on Earth, where a few hundred people live nearly 2,000 miles from their nearest neighbor. Thanks for watching.